Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural episode, I cannot say that word, inaugural episode of So This Is Freedom. I'm your host, Kit Nemeth, and I am joined today by our first ever guest, Ben. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm all right. How are you doing, Kit?
I'm doing well. Great to have you on the show. I'm absolutely nailing this intro. I'm talking like I have a real podcast. Anyway.
It sounds just like it. Very convincing.
Exactly. Like I'm basically Joe Rogan, but woke. I'm Joe. Woke.
You are We've been looking for the left-wing Joe Rogan. We found it.
I will be the left-wing Joe Rogan. I will gladly accept that position. So, it's been almost a week at the time of recording since the historic 2025 Canadian federal election. I wrote a bit about it on my Substack, link in the description. Yeah, I said the thing. But there's definitely a lot more to say, so I'm going to ask a blunt question first of all. Why should people value your opinions on and your analysis of Canadian politics?
Wow, this is just how we're starting.
Yeah.
I've had opinions on Canadian politics for a long time. I'm a member of the NDP. I am planning on going into the world of, sort of wonderful world of political staffing and all of that. I've been a paid activist for the party before, and I'm very involved in NDP world stuff and sort of Canadian progressive politics more generally. Sort of, avoid providing too much identifying information, but I like to think I have, a pretty firm understanding of that space and where I'm coming from, and then have a lot to say about the election and the sort of political realignments it conveyed.
My grade 10 history teacher was a very funny guy. This is relevant, I promise. And one time he was talking about McCaughey, and he said, if you're a Habs fan, well, first of all, I'm sorry, and then went on to make whatever point he was making. That's kind of the NDP right now.
I'm from Ontario. People say that about the Maple Leafs. Being an NDP is like being a Leafs fan.
Yeah, I'm kind of stunned by that, just because I didn't think anyone actually liked the Leafs, but that's another conversation. So
it's okay. I like the Habs.
The NDP is getting does the NDP actually have their interim leader yet?
We do not. And I'm not sure who it's going to be, because I think the conventional wisdom is that it'll be Alexandre Boularice, because he had expressed interest in the job, and he has been the deputy leader for a long time, and he's a very sort of calm, serious figure. But I also, if he takes the job of interim leader, that locks him out from seeking the permanent job. And
it does?
I'm not sure if he wants to do that. Well, in theory, because if you're interim leader, you have to be running the caucus, and generally in Canadian politics, an interim leader is someone who doesn't want the job.
Okay, so when
NDP... so I would imagine it will be Boularice, but if he wants the permanent gig, it could go to someone like Jenny Kwan or Gord Johns.
Okay, well, when the NDP election, the leadership election, does come up, well, who do you think will run? Who do you think will win? And who would you like to win?
It's pretty clear that at least Heather McPherson wants to run. She's our only MP in Alberta. No, she is. She is our only MP in Alberta. She wasn't our only MP in Alberta until just this election, when we lost Blake Desjardins. But she's a very sort of establishment figure. She's quite a moderate NDP member, very close with like the Rachel Notley Alberta NDP people. I think like she's a good person. She's a good party soldier. She will probably not be super popular with some of the left of the party because of the more moderate positions she's had to take due to, running in Alberta. She was actually the only non-conservative MP in Alberta in 2019, which was the big pipeline election. Aside from her, Valérie Plante was making some interesting signals.
Sorry,
and I honestly...
Did you say Plante?
Is that wrong? I have no idea.
Yeah, Valérie Plante.
Well, that's very embarrassing for me. Thank you, Kit.
Well, I'll give you a pass since you're from Ontario.
Yeah, I'm a hopelessly unilingual Ontarian who has only read her name. No, sorry, Valérie Plante. She made some interesting signals. Didn't rule it out. You'd be more plugged into sort of the world of Montreal politics than I, and maybe like tuned to that. I don't know much about her. I think Projet Montreal has been a pretty impressive political party. There's a book, Saving the City, by one of their sort of staffers. It's a pretty good read. But I don't think she'd be a particularly good national leader. She'd pick up some seats in Montreal, but we can't spend a federal campaign talking about, Valérie Plante has made it impossible to drive in Montreal because of her woke socialist bike lanes. That's just, that's not something that a winning political party spend a whole campaign talking about. Other than those two, who are the ones who have sort of made the most noise, Leah Gazan is someone I'm hearing a lot about from people I know in NDP politics. She's the MP from Winnipeg Centre. She's we have 2 Indigenous women in our caucus now out of 7, which has to be the highest proportion for any party ever. I think she'd be a very strong candidate. She's quite radical. She was openly associating herself with being a socialist. She was part of the Idle No More movement. So she'd have, I'd be interested in seeing how she would carry herself in a leadership campaign, but I think she could be one to watch as quite a popular candidate for the grassroots. As I'm sure you've noticed, that all 3 people I've talked about have been women. There's been a lot of talk in the NDP about having a woman leader as our next. That's sort of the general consensus, is that the next leader should be a woman. I don't know if we're trying out some l'alternance thing, which the Liberals had, where they would go back and forth between a French and an English leader. If we're doing that with I don't know if that's the idea there, but that seems to be the consensus. Even Matthew Green, who was being talked about as a potential next leader until he lost his seat on Monday, was back before he lost his seat even saying that our next leader should be a strong woman. So it looks like we're going to be having a girl boss contest.
Okay, yeah, we'd love to see it. Do you think a woman is electable in this political climate? Because we had one female prime minister. We had Kim Campbell, and it's not unreasonable to say that the reason her time in office didn't last long is because of the absolute, for lack of a better word, shit show that was the Progressive Conservative Party trying to amend the Constitution. But some people would say that her being a woman did have something to do with her time in office being cut short. What do you have to say about that?
Well, it's funny because Kim Campbell was actually very popular when she first came into office, and a lot of people, I think, were actually really excited about the idea of having a woman prime minister. And I think it was more her own sort of incompetence and lack of charisma that brought her down than her gender, although I'm not going to say that wasn't part of it.
Okay, yeah. So how do these people who don't have seats in the current parliament, how do these people gain prominence, especially if they've never had a seat before in the party?
That's a good question. It was actually a source of a lot of controversy back when Singh first became leader, because he didn't have a seat, and we had a pretty large parliamentary caucus back then. We had the 40-odd seats after the 2015 election, which was, the great disappointment of Mulcair in 2015, but we still got our second best showing of any election, with about 45 seats. And so it was a lot of, why didn't we pick someone from that large parliamentary caucus? And then when Singh came in, and he was this new guy from outside the caucus from Ontario, a lot of people, did not think he was a very strong leader. And I think a lot of that was driven by these MPs not really knowing him very well because he didn't have a seat in Parliament. And it took him a while to get that seat. And he only got that because Kennedy Stewart resigned to run for mayor of Vancouver. And if that hadn't happened, he was thinking about running in Outremont, where Mulcair was, which would have been a disaster. Two of our, I think that the 2 most likely leaders are Heather McPherson and Leah Gazan, and they both have seats in Parliament.
Yeah, actually, Leah Gazan is the one you said was a little more radical than the other options.
Yeah.
Do you think she's going to do the same, I'll call it the Kamala Harris pivot. I mean, maybe you wouldn't really call it a pivot, but do you think she could move more to the center, and if so, how much more to the center?
I don't think that would be a very good way of winning an NDP leadership race. But I think
after the race,
I think by necessity she'll have to relax or not focus on some of her for more radical positions. But honestly, she's not, it's more about her, it's more about an aesthetics thing, like where she'll openly call herself a socialist, or, I mean, the fact that, unfortunately, the fact that she's an Indigenous woman, and like a working class, from a working class background, is sort of inherently coded as radical to Canadians.
That's true. Jagmeet Singh openly called himself a socialist. Do you think that contributed to his unpopularity?
No, I don't think most people knew him as that. I think it was a lot more. I mean, I think the problem with Singh was really that he didn't define the NDP as a distinct party from the Liberals.
I would definitely agree with that. So going forward with the NDP, how would they differentiate themselves from the Liberals, and how would they rebuild for the next election?
But we need to articulate that there's a reason the NDP exists, right? And that's not, if we accept that our only goal is to keep out the Conservative Party, which I think is what Jagmeet Singh decided it was his goal when he did that interview where he was like, I put Canada ahead of the NDP. And it's like, that is not your job. Your job is to elect NDP MPs, because if you're just going to accept that, no matter what, we should fold over and let the Liberals win, because they're better, then why are we different parties? Why are we not Liberals? Why don't we just have a two-party system? If that is what, you think the NDP folding is going to help them. What we need is to present the NDP as the actual way to defeat Conservatives, which is, distinct from the Liberals, because they can't compete in these places where their brand has been decimated, in these resource towns with these immigrant communities that have decided that they are not, the Liberals are not the answer. The sort of Laurentian, idea of progressivism is not the answer. We need this more radical economic vision. But I think I'm getting ahead of myself a bit. But we do need to articulate that the NDP is not just a party of this sort of mushy, soft left, of like a sort of vibes progressivism. It's a party of a militant party of the working class.
Yeah, and you could say that Tom Mulcair sort of had the same issue, where he was like overly focused on beating the Conservatives rather than having actual policy.
Yeah, no, Mulcair and Mulcair's interesting because he was very much this like, the NDP is in opposition. We need to win, so we will get this guy who seems exactly like a prime minister. And because we've never had an NDP prime minister, he doesn't seem like a New Democrat. He was very much like the, sort of Keir Starmer, Blair, we'll sell our soul to win. And the problem with that is, unlike Keir Starmer or Blair, he didn't actually win.
Yeah, when it comes to the NDP rebuilding with a better policy, I mean, one thing they tried with Singh recently in this election campaign was kind of a grassroots creator program, and there was some controversy with that.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, one of their creators was someone who also had an OnlyFans page and went under fire for that. And at that point, the NDP kind of abandoned her, like sort of almost like they soft fired. I mean, not that they had like officially employed her, but it was almost like she got soft fired.
No, and there was something about how she had like compared, the Israeli genocide to the Holocaust. And then, like, we got all these headlines that was like, the NDP's OnlyFans model, who is also like a Holocaust denier. And it was like that was a great headline to get in like week 2 of the campaign. Yeah, and I think that the party was kind of I think that as with everything that a party does, there should have been more vetting, but also they were a little bit sort of weak-kneed in abandoning her and throwing her to the wolves.
Yeah, well, I attended the first meeting of that creator grassroots thing. It gave me hope at first for the NDP that they were trying something that could actually work. I mean, the right has taken advantage of independent creators to spread their message for years, and I was glad that the NDP was trying to do that. But then I went to the meeting and saw there was such little direction and was very vibes-based. They were like, basically, express your authentic voice, but for the NDP, like, what does that mean?
Yeah. I would argue, as with most things, that, when comparing us to the right, the problem is that they have a lot more money than us.
That's true. But with the way, like, the algorithms are set up now, you don't necessarily need to have that funding. And we're seeing this more and more. I mean, some of these people I do suspect are funded to a degree. I mean, they almost definitely are. I don't know if you know, in the United States.
Yeah.
David Pakman, Brian Tyler Cohen, those sorts of people.
Yeah, they're all sort of pieces of the Democratic Party, right?
I mean, to a degree, I mean, they do tend to criticize the Democratic Party a little more than, say, like legacy media would. But
Yeah.
in terms of that, I mean, even like 10 years ago, like 5 years ago, 2 years ago, we didn't have that as much. So with a combination
Right.
of those mouthpieces and independent creators, we don't need the funding to the degree that the right does to fund these independent creators.
That's fair. No, I just meant if you're going to have a program like that, for it to actually be good, you need sort of have a lot of resources to invest in it. But anyway, I was going to say, one of the main criticisms you saw of Singh was that he was this sort of, TikTok leader, this guy who was super online and tuned into like the American Twitch streamers and like wanted to like that time he played Among Us with AOC and Hassan. But I actually think that was one of the best things that Singh ever did. And that attribute of his was actually a very, he was ahead of his time in a lot of this sort of online politics stuff. And it's annoying to me to see a lot of the like genuine criticisms of Singh and very apt ones be combined with this, like, he was like too much of a, cringy TikTok guy, which is, we live in it's the cringy TikTok guy's world now. We just live in it.
Yeah, so with the minority government that the Liberals ended up getting, are we seeing anything taking place in terms of like coalition building? Like, what do you think coalition work in this parliament would be like? I know there's like a bit of a taboo around coalition work, and that the supply and confidence agreement was a little controversial. What do you see? How do you see the parties working together against the Conservatives, especially in this parliament?
I definitely don't think we're going back to a supply and confidence agreement, which was often accepted as one of the biggest like drivers of this electoral disaster that the NDP had, because as we were talking about, blurring the lines between the parties, if why would you vote for the fake Liberal Party when you vote for the real Liberal Party and they are going to win? The supply and confidence was part of that, I think. And one of the ideas I had, or one of the sort of post-election things I've been mulling over, is if Singh, more than Carney, was actually the one in this election who was associated with Trudeau. Because he was, the Conservatives spent a year and a half hammering on doing this sort of air war with ads and media and social media, talking about the Trudeau-Singh coalition and their, like, the Liberal NDP carbon tax. And the reason they were so caught off guard by Carney was because he ended up he was very aesthetically different from Trudeau. He was this, older, very boring, soft-spoken guy who, read as much more economically literate, much more smart in like the policy sphere. Well, I think Singh was very much associated with the same like late 2010s aesthetic, wokeness, like the sort of suave, cool guy thing that Trudeau sort of came from. And I think voters in a lot of ways took Singh as a proxy for Trudeau and punished the NDP for it. But that's one theory, and I think that all comes back to why the supply and confidence was such a huge disaster, and it's why I don't think we're going back to that, that era of coalition politics. But there will obviously be, ways that the NDP works with the Liberals, and there was some media conversation about if there would be NDP MPs crossing the floor. That's not true. That's not going to happen. But there's certainly, I hope that they use the leverage they have to make sure Carney doesn't, roll back any of the programs that the supply and confidence agreement got, like the dental care program, the pharmacare program. But then I also hope that doesn't just become the end all be all of NDP politics, like it was for a long time. And the main thing is that the NDP cannot afford to fight an election right now. So Carney doesn't have much to worry about in terms of us voting no confidence.
Okay, and the supply and confidence agreement, tearing that up when he did, I mean, would you say that contributes to the NDP's reputation? Because it was a weird decision, I find.
I think the problem was tearing it up and then not having anything come of it. He made a whole giant public spectacle of it and then just kept voting confidence. I still have no idea what he was thinking. It's kind of bizarre.
Yeah, and then when there were calls for Trudeau to resign, I remember Singh just kept saying everything's on the table, and people accused him of not wanting him to resign because he wanted to like wait for his pension. But then you have another side saying that that was actually quite strategic because he knew that if an election was called then the Liberals and NDP would easily lose to Conservatives.
Yeah, I definitely think it's possible that I'm not going to go ahead and say it was, but I think the pension very well could have been part of it, especially if you saw how he lost his seat quite badly, and it's possible he knew that was on the ground, that was what was happening in Burnaby, but also that's sort of what he like towards in the dying days of the campaign. Singh did he did a Toronto Star interview where he talked about how he had put Canada ahead of the NDP in not calling that election, even though the NDP would have won a lot of seats because the Liberals were destroyed, because the Conservatives and Pierre Poilievre would have won. I consider that, in my opinion, to be quite a big betrayal of his job as NDP leader, and a big betrayal of all the people who worked very hard to put all those seats on the table, right? It's not his job to save the Liberals. It's the Liberals' job to save the Liberals. He should have just let the chips fall as they may, in my opinion. And, that'll be a question that will define NDP politics for a long time is, what side were you on? And, do you think we should have called that election or not? I totally respect and understand the people who think that, we shouldn't have done that because Poilievre represented a very unique threat. But then I would reject the strategy in that, because I don't think anyone could have seen coming the kind of election that we just had and the comeback the Liberals would have. I don't think, I think anyone who claims that was always on the table, and that Singh was actually this 4D chess mastermind seeing into the future of Trump deciding to destroy the global economy on a whim. I think that they're bullshitting.
Yeah, I mean, the polling charts for this election have to be like one of the funniest graphs of all time.
Oh, it's insane.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of Liberals, though, Mark Carney's housing plan, well, not Mark Carney, I'm sure he didn't draft it completely himself, but the Liberals' housing plan, what do you think about that? I
like a lot of the promises they've made. I think it's pretty good. In some ways, I sort of selfishly, in like a sort of selfish partisan way, I hope that they prove disappointing, but also I think that there's a lot of good stuff in there with the national builder, and it's stuff that, the NDP has been talking about for a while. We ran in the Ontario election on having a public builder. Getting the government back in the business of building houses is obviously a really fantastic thing, and it would be pretty significant if he could take if the Liberals are going to stay in power after this parliament. What needs to happen is some very serious action on the housing crisis, and that could be this. I have no idea. I don't trust Carney as far as I could throw him, because of how willing he's been to just change policies on a whim because of what's popular. I mean, I consider it pretty, and I was never a fan of the carbon tax, but I consider it pretty shameful how he just, spent years advocating for it and then saw where the wind was blowing and decided to scrap it, which was, I think that, so I don't think that Carney is a particularly principled person or someone who actually believes much of what he says.
That may be true, but it was kind of only the right move to cut the carbon tax when he did.
Well, for sure. I just mean if the politics become untenuous for the housing crisis, or for the housing policy as well, he'll be the first guy to throw it under the bus.
So you're not confident if he'll follow through on everything, or even some of the things?
I have no idea. It really depends on how the circumstances develop, but I would expect him to do more of it than not do it, and I like the platform. I think it's good policy.
Do you think it's enough?
Certainly, like nothing's going to be enough for short of massive warlike mobilization to build houses everywhere and destroy all zoning regulations and create the woke 15-minute city utopia. But I mean, I don't think there's much more that could be done with the levers of the federal government that exist as they do.
Yeah, I mean, what I would like to see from the housing plan going forward is just more details, because I found a lot of it was kind of vague. I mean, they said that they're going to get rid of some zoning restrictions. Well, which ones? They said that they're going to build these like manufactured homes, but they didn't really elaborate on what kind of homes these will be, like single family homes, duplexes, that sort of thing.
Yeah, the vagueness reminds me a lot of the stuff they started throwing out in the, the twilight days of the Trudeau premiership, when they were like, we're going to build high-speed rail. We're actually going to, cut temporary foreign workers. We're going to do all these things that people have been planning for, and they're just kind of throwing them out with no plan to do them. They're making announcements, and the Canadian federal government is very good at getting out with a placard and making a big announcement, and then not following through.
I'd actually forgotten about that, the high-speed rail. So you don't think there's any chance they're going to follow through on that?
I think that they'll try. I just think it'll go like most projects the federal government does, where it'll be, mired in bureaucracy, and maybe we'll get somewhere in 10, 15 years. I mean, in the Ontario government, they've been promising the Eglinton Crosstown for like a decade and a half now.
So like a decade of consulting before a shovel even gets put in the ground, basically.
Consulting, yeah, and putting up signs saying future station.
Poilievre losing his seat was hilarious. What do you think of the by-election he's running in? You know which riding that is, right?
Yeah, Battle River Crowfoot.
Yeah, exactly. In Alberta, that's an interesting choice. Given, I mean, it's close politically speaking, but where is Poilievre even from? Like, it is a very obvious parachute candidate move.
He is an Albertan by birth. He grew up in Calgary.
So he's actually going closer to home now.
Yes, no, he moved to Ottawa, I think, to work for the Conservative Party, and then Carleton was actually, more accurately a parachute because it was just a safe seat that was nearby.
Yeah, that was like a common thing to do in Carleton, if I'm not mistaken, right? That they tend to have a lot of parachute candidates. But
because it was the most conservative riding that was near Ottawa.
Yeah. Do you think that running in this riding specifically was not only like a political move in terms of the voting demographics there, but also like bringing Poilievre closer to home, because there is like a focus on bringing it home, as he likes to say? Do you think that plays a factor?
No, I don't think so. I think it's all politics, and I think I imagine that guy, what's his name, Damien or whatever, he just pulled the short end of the stick.
Yeah, I mean, it really does give off that, I mean, maybe this is a little vulgar, but it gives off that sort of cuck energy that a lot of conservatives have, where they seem to have this adoration for their strongman leader, where they're willing to sacrifice a lot of stuff when, like, if that was anyone else who they would see it as, taking away or whatever, but they're so eager to give up things that they value if it serves their strongman.
I'll give you a fun fact about Carleton, actually, about the riding. This is something I've heard secondhand, like second, third hand. The name was almost changed to Rideau Carleton, but Poilievre very heavily lobbied it to be called Carleton, because Carleton is the name of the riding that John A. Macdonald used to represent, and he really wanted to have the same riding as his hero.
Yeah, that's whenever that guy brings up John A. Macdonald. Yeah. But on the topic of conservatives, there is a growing rift, it seems like. I mean, we saw this in the election coverage. Well, did you see the interview, I think it was CBC did, with Jamil Jivani on the evening?
I did, yeah, where he was going after Doug Ford.
Yeah. What do you think of that?
Well, I mean, I hate Doug Ford's guts, and I think he's, I really don't like the sort of rehabilitation he's getting among Liberals just because he's anti-Poilievre. So I kind of think of it as like it's not exactly a lesser evil thing. It's they're both so awful, and they both represent, Doug Ford at least is good at, the throwing poor people into the meat grinder and destroying our public services and building massive, endless suburban sprawl. Like, he's just he wins elections, But Giovanni's interesting because, I mean, he didn't win by much, but I sort of half expected him to lose just because of the J.D. Vance connection. Yeah,
I mean, he seemed to worry about that a little bit too late. I mean, he was kind of just spitting all of the talking points of, like, podcast bro mega, which, I mean, rich coming from me, but he was using all of those talking points, and then kind of walked everything back a few days later when he was like, hey, JD, maybe don't come here for a while.
And you know what? If Trump hadn't won, as like with a lot of this, is if Trump hadn't won, the Conservatives would be in a much better place. But I think Giovanni would have been a pretty formidable force because he's well-spoken, he's young, he's a person of color, which is those are all demographics that the Conservatives are really starting to do well with. And yeah, he has that sort of podcast, that very like authentic, relatable kind of voice of young people energy that I think would have gone a lot. But unfortunately, the association with JD Vance is deeply toxic for him.
Yeah. So going forward for the Conservatives, I mean, I hear a lot of talk of Poilievre being kind of cannibalized when his leadership review comes around. Do you think that's going to happen? And if so, do you think they're going to elect a more Giovanni-style leader or a more Ford-style leader?
Personally, I don't think so. I think Poilievre is going to stay.
How come?
Because he won by, so when he was first elected, he got 72% of the vote, which is more than Harper got in 2003. More than Harper got in 2003. And he just won the highest percent of the vote for any leader of the modern Conservative Party of Canada, and for any right of center leader in Canada since Mulroney in 1988. He is popular with the party. He's brought in a new base of hundreds of thousands of people. The vast majority of party members are people who either voted for him in the leadership race or additionally joined to vote for him in the leadership race.
So he is popular enough in your view that fumbling the election that badly, failing to pivot from his attack politics, and that those hilarious polling charts again, and losing his seat, all that is not enough to counter his popularity?
Well, I would challenge your point that he actually fumbled that badly. I mean, he obviously fell from a 25-point lead, but there's a lot to argue about how much of that was his fault and how he actually did better than a lot of people expected. Especially when you look at where new voters come in, it is where the Conservatives need to win a majority government. And so it's like there's a lot of these young voters who joined the Conservative Party just now and voted Conservative with Poilievre as their first leader. I think a lot of them would feel pretty betrayed by if they cast out Poilievre and brought in like a Tim Houston, a Doug Ford figure.
So you think
but
that...
I could very well be wrong.
Well, yeah, of course, but your impression is that that new base is sizable enough to have that effect on the party?
I mean, yeah, and my impression is that it would be the smartest choice for them. I think that Poilievre is the leader with the best chance of winning the next election for the Conservatives. So
the tent is still big enough, but not too big and not too small. It's the right size of tent for Poilievre.
I think so. That's my read of the situation. And I think if Carney doesn't follow through with some pretty major action on housing, and if the outlook around public safety, around immigration doesn't change very rapidly, I think he has a very good chance at still being prime minister. Yeah, I mean, Carney is walking into, this is kind of true of any politician who's elected to any office in this climate, but I think Carney especially is walking into just a political minefield, and if he screws anything up even remotely, people are not going to show him mercy, because I don't know what it is, but when someone even who pretends to be left-wing like Carney, if someone who pretends to be left-wing or is left-wing makes the kind of mistakes that Conservatives make regularly in terms of the economy, in terms of other issues, they're going to get so much more shit for it than a Conservative would. Yeah. And for some reason, Carney is very popular right now. And he's more popular than Trudeau pretty much ever was. And I think that's just because of his sort of apolitical background and the sort of very big change from Trudeau that he represents. And so a lot of people were kind of desperate for anyone who wasn't him. And he represents a breath of fresh air. But yeah, I think that popularity it's wide, but it's very shallow. It reminds me a lot, and I think these comparisons are a little bit too simplistic, but it reminds me a lot of Keir Starmer. Yeah, it is shallow, sure, but I think one other factor about Carney and how popular he is how shockingly charismatic he is, especially considering his relative lack of public background. He's charismatic in the way that Trudeau desperately wanted to be, the way Trudeau wished he was. Yeah, he's authentic. Like Trudeau could give a good speech, but he was never, he never felt real. And Carney feels like just he does feel very real, when he talks about hockey or music or, that Nardwuar interview. He seems like a real person, which is, yeah, and that's the trait that no number of no millions of dollars on consultants can get you in politics anymore is authenticity, and it's the most valuable one these days.
Exactly. I mean, there have been so many times where, like, during his rallies and whatnot, he'll make like an off the dome comment to something that happens, and it's like a stand-up comedian doing crowd work. It's genuinely impressive.
And you know what? It'll be really interesting because he could end up being a really talented, because he's never been in Parliament before, but he could end up being really good at doing that.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that got Polyev so popular was how he was able to, like, farm C-SPAN clips into, like, TikToks and YouTube Shorts. I mean, the first time I ever saw Polyev online, before he became leader, was that one interaction he had with a liberal minister talking about housing or something like that. The one where he just kept saying how much. I think Carney could do something similar to that.
Yeah, he comes. I don't know if Carney can do that sort of, like, but I think he could definitely be. He could be very, very eloquent when he needs to be, and very good at the clapbacks.
Yeah, exactly. And just a very broad general question, just to finish out this first episode. What do you think this parliament is going to look like? Because it is a really weird one, I would say, at least.
It's bizarre, yeah.
What are some sort of broad strokes that you would say, like, this? What is this going to be like?
There's a lot of conservatives who thought they would be getting cabinet jobs, and I bet they're going to be pretty antsy. So it's probably going to be a pretty nasty parliament, especially with, there's more conservatives than there were before. There were about 120 conservatives, and now there's 144. So it's a big opposition just because of the two-party squeeze that happened. It's one of the most, consensus-wise, one of the most right-wing parliaments we've ever had, because Carney explicitly moved the Liberals more to the center, and the NDP got wiped out, and the Bloc got squeezed as well. I am very interested to see how the Bloc is going to react to King Charles giving the throne speech.
Yeah, is that his first throne speech?
Yeah. Well, it's going to be Charles's first time delivering the throne speech in person, but because that's just not usually what happens. It's usually the Governor General.
How come it wasn't?
Because Carney asked Charles to come as a, display of Canadian sovereignty.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. Or, like, it'll be interesting. It's it doesn't often happen. The Queen, the last time was when the Queen did it in 1977, I think.
Okay, yeah.
It'll be kind of cool. But I'm sort of half amused at imagining the Bloc reacting to that in the House of Commons. But yeah, no, it could be a productive parliament just because of how many seats the Liberals have, and the NDP will probably be fairly reliable votes on things like housing policy. The Conservatives will probably join them if Carney wants to keep with his sort of pivot on immigration. And he's also pretty pro infrastructure, pro development, and so that means he'll get Conservative votes on things like natural resources. So they'll probably get plenty done, but it will be a pretty miserable parliament just to watch because of how rabid the Conservatives are, and how I think, and how right wing everyone is.
I think the Bloc are going to make some interesting points in terms of King Charles, but of course no one's going to take them seriously because in the eyes of everyone else, the Bloc is like the drunk guy at the party who you're like, yeah, sure, bro, totally, and let's get you to bed. But you said, like, it's going to be a sort of, I guess, aggressive parliament. Like, do you think the conservative sloganeering, the never-ending sloganeering nightmare, like, what was that thing they were saying a while back? Something time's up, and there was like a clip of every time they had said that in the span of 1 week. The clip was like 10 minutes long. So do you think that's going to continue in terms of rhetorical strategy for the Conservatives?
It depends on if Polyev makes a strategic pivot or not, and it also depends on if he stays as leader. Because that was very much his, like, that was clearly something that Jenny Byrne had decided he needed to do. And it was like, stay on message, pick these slogans. It was clearly from some school of politics that believed that was the way to win elections. And that hasn't seemed to have worked out. So I could imagine there being a pivot to a different rhetorical strategy, but I have no idea what it could be.
Yeah, but like Polyev and strategic pivot are kind of like mutually exclusive things.
You say that, but he did, like, halfway through the campaign, he stopped saying,
way too late.
I mean, halfway, like right before the campaign, he stopped saying axe the tax, and he started saying for a change and Canada first. And then halfway through the campaign, he sort of dropped the Canada first. It was just for a change. And I'd argue it worked because he ended a lot better than he started, like in the campaign period. I mean,
Yeah, a lot of good sound bites from the for the change.
yeah,
What was it? For a change. Yes, for a change. But even like a few days after Mark Carney axed the tax, he was still standing in front of an actual tax lectern, and there was a lot of
which was bizarre, and I, wanted to like shake his shoulders and what are you doing?
Yeah. So, closing statements. Do you have any?
Our Canada is less cooked than many of our peers. I got too into British politics over the past few months, and now I'm depressed.
So, you're saying we're less cooked than other countries?
We are less cooked than other countries, I think.
I think that's a pretty good closing statement. Yeah, thank you so much for joining me on this first episode of So This Is Freedom. I look forward to maybe talking to you again in the future when other
for sure.
Interesting things occur both in and outside of Canada.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. Maybe we could talk about the leadership race when that kicks off.
Yeah, for sure. So for those who are listening in the future, well, for me, the future, for them, it's going to be the present because that's how time works. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.